Living a natural life in a non-natural world can be a challenge. Many people would say that we're not even equipped to live in the modern world we're living in. And so what do we do about that? Well, we're going to take a look at that in today's episode of the Movement, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body, typically starting feet first, because, those things are your foundation after all. We break down the propaganda, the mythology, sometimes the flat out lies you've been told about what it takes to run, walk, hike, play, do yoga, CrossFit, whatever it is you like to do with your body, and to do it enjoyably and effectively and efficiently. And did I mention enjoyably? I know I did. It's a trick question. Because look, if you're not having a good time, do something different till you are, because you're not going to keep it up anyway if you're not enjoying it. I am Steven Sashen, your host of the Movement podcast, also the co-founder and CEO of Zero Shoes. And we call it the Movement because we are creating a movement that involves you. I'll tell you how. It's free, no big deal, about natural movement, letting your body do what bodies are supposed to do. And the way you become part of that is really easy. Go to our website. Go to jointhemovement.com. You don't need to do anything to join. There's no payments. There's no nothing. That's just the website that I got. But that's where you can find previous episodes of the podcast. You can interact with us in various ways and find all the places you can find us on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, et cetera. Of course, the podcast is available wherever you find podcasts. And that kind of covers it. So with that said, wait, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, no, it's really, really simple. If you want to be part of the tribe, just subscribe. Hit the thumbs up or the like, or they leave a comment or a review. You know how to do it. It's really, really simple. All right, so let's dive in. Kyle, do me a favor. Can you introduce yourself? Tell people who you are and what you do and why you think you may be here.
For sure. My name is Kyle Koch. I am an online personal trainer. I'm a nature connection guide. And my most favorite thing is I facilitate transformative experiences outdoors around community, play, and movement.
And first of all, that is some very impressive facial hair for people who are not watching. For people who are, they've already come to that conclusion. So how long did that take? Because I'm sitting here on like a couple of days. And frankly, if I had remembered we were going to have this chat, I would have shaved. So I can't do what you did. So I'm always curious.
I'm almost a year in. It falls off every spring.
With a weed eater, or just, you molt, or just sort of disappears because it starts to get warm.
The birds start picking at it when they're trying to build their nest. It's got to start some fires. It works its way into the world.
Got it. So before we dive into what we teased at the top of this thing, can you say a little bit about sort of, where you are, what you're doing, how you kind of discovered the sort of natural, not only just natural movement, but the bringing natural things back into people's lives? What's your story is the better way I could have asked that.
Yeah, I've been told I have an interesting story because right now I'm living off grid in northern Minnesota, and I'm in the middle of the woods, literally on a 40-acre property that my girlfriend owns. But I started out as an IT technician in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, living in a penthouse apartment, enjoying a lot of modernity in technology, partying, drinking, all of the things that the city has to offer. And I was dissatisfied. I didn't have like deep meaning or belonging in my life until I went to a 9-month survival school out in Washington. And I learned how to track. I learned medicinal edible plants, how to be in communication with the living world around us in all the ways that humans have been doing for, I don't know, like ever. And then I was transformed deeply. And ever since then, I've been on a quest to like understand like what happened to me and how did nature facilitate that.
So first things first, if I were going to be living off the grid and being as minimalist as possible, I would have picked somewhere warmer.
True.
Just me.
Yeah. This land has actually been in my girlfriend's family for almost 60 years. So we're the third generation to take over and to be stewards of this land. So that ultimately is what led us here. We didn't really pick it. It kind of picked us in some ways.
Yeah. So, and when you say what happened to you, do you mean like what happened to you as in the global you of humans that went from being more connected to the world that they're in to being disconnected, or you personally from like that shift from IT pro and having all of those modern things to what you're doing now? Which one are you referring to, or both?
A little bit of both. Like I was changed in a way that I didn't even know, like a problem was solved that I didn't know that I had. So I didn't realize the extent of my disconnection until I actually got connected.
So what was the thing that inspired you to go on a 9-month program of being, and I want to hear more about exactly what you did too, but what was the thing? Because, I'm always interested when someone is thinking about like natural movement, like when they looking into minimalist footwear, for example, what's that first thing that made them be curious? Because at first they probably didn't believe this was a legit thing or believe it was real. And then something made them curious first. And that's what then leads you into researching and discovering, et cetera. So what was that thing that was going on that got you curious and then led you to this 9-month program?
Yeah, it was a combination of two things. One, I realized if I didn't have a computer and or an internet connection, I didn't have a lot of useful human skills. Right? If the power was out, my skill set was minimal. And that led me to like survival TV shows. And then eventually I did a weekend course. And in that weekend course, I made fire from sticks, right? Rubbing sticks together. I blew them into flames. And I realized the deep well of potential that was hidden inside of me. Like I took sticks from the woods and I turned them into fire. I was like, wow, I am so capable. What else can I do?
Well, you know that many, many, many thousands of years ago, that was what IT pros did. So you were still an IT guy, just different technology.
Exactly. Call it primitive technology.
Yeah. I like to say back then, people would say, now people would say, hey, that's not rocket science. Back then they would say, hey, that's not rock science. So
exactly.
So then 9 months, I mean, what the hell? I can only imagine. I mean, like I'm having a flashback to when I was in Thailand in 1989 and I went out like my first day on this one island and spent the whole day out swimming and hanging out and having a great time. And then the next day I was sunburned like crazy. And there was literally like nothing I could do other than sit under a tree for a couple of days and wait till it healed enough that I could move without being in pain. And it took me 4 days to just unwind enough to be able to just sit there. So I can't even guess can you talk about just that mental transition that occurred from leaving a IT job, penthouse, et cetera? I mean, you had an idea of what you were getting into, but you didn't know what you were getting into.
I had no idea what I was getting into. Even the idea that I had did not even come close to what actually happened. And, it's kind of like you said, we live in a world of doing. We are human doers instead of human beings. And we live a lot from our mind. And we have this saying like, lose your mind and come to your senses, right? And when you come to your senses, you realize that so much is happening around you, right? There's this idea of sit spot. You go to a spot and you sit and you observe, and that'll teach you everything you need to know about the world. And what you find is like modern forms of TV, like there's a whole drama going on outside. Things are living, dying, being murdered, hunted, chased. Like so much is happening if you just tuned in. The same way you're flipping through Netflix, right? The world is a book that you can learn to read, but we just aren't interested anymore for some reason.
People have said to me sometimes they look at ancient civilizations and go, I can't believe they figured out fill in the blank. And I go, well, they didn't have anything else to do other than spend generations observing something like what the stars were doing or what happened. Now, that doesn't mean they got the right answer every time by any stretch of the imagination. But this idea that either they were better or that we're smarter or dumber, either way. But it's like, to your point, it's like there's different things to put your attention on when you're out in the middle of nowhere we're out in the middle of somewhere that's, that people call in the modern world called nowhere, that once you start paying attention, there's a lot going on. Can you give me can you give me any specifics of things that were kind of revelatory discoveries or something that just made you go, ooh and ah?
I mean, the amount of food that is around you in any given environment is pretty ridiculous.
Like
all your greens, berries, nuts, seeds, right? And then, not to mention animals, right? I both have lived in the woods, like deep off grid, like in a tent for, 200 days at a time. And I've lived in downtown Seattle. And I'll tell you that there is actually more abundance in the city than there is in the nature. It's concentrated, right? There are so many birds and predators and food sources in your neighborhood as there are in the greater wild world. They're just a little bit more spread out.
Oh, that's it.
So that was a big revelatory moment of like, everything that I need has been and always will be provided by the world. Right? Whether you get it from a grocery store or your landscaping or, the woods, right? The same things are there.
There's a guy who, I don't know if he still does it. I lived in New York City 30 years ago, and there was a guy who used to do tours of Central Park that were all edible tours. It was all showing how you could get all the food you need just by walking through Central Park if you knew where to find it.
Exactly. And a lot of that food is more nutritious, right? The nutritional content, density, and bioavailability in those foods is way higher than anything you're going to find at the supermarket. And a lot of people are like, but what about like the toxins? I'm like, your food is sprayed with toxins, right? Like whether you harvest it yourself or you buy it from somebody, like at least if you get it, or have a better idea of what's in it or on it.
So I keep coming back to your 9-month trip because I can only imagine that just what the transition was like during that, and then more the transition coming back. But also I can only imagine there was at least a couple of like, holy crap stories that are the highlights of that trip.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, some of those moments are following animal tracks. All the way until you get to see that animal, right? The level, right? Tracking has been described to me as like our first language, right? If you want to eat, you find out that these animal tracks look like this, and they eventually lead to the animal. And along the way, you'll find out if the animal is running, walking, if that animal has eaten during that day, if that animal is sick, healthy, right? So much can be brought forth from the tracks, and you're not thinking about your bills. You're not thinking about your to-do list. You are so engrossed in the moment and so embodied and caught up in the story of this being that like everything else just falls away and you find your place in the world. And then when you get to see that animal, and that animal doesn't run, is not scared, is not concerned, that animal sees you as the animal that you are, you realize that you truly and deeply and have always belonged to this world, despite the kind of plastic bubble we've created to separate ourselves.
We have a number of Zero Shoes customers who've talked about running trails and accidentally sneaking up on an animal because they were running so quietly. And the animal is more shocked than they are, but often doesn't run away because it's like, how the hell did you do that?
Exactly.
That's amazing. There's an old joke about this of two hunters, these two dumb hunters who are out, and one of them goes, I think these are deer tracks. The other goes, I'm pretty sure they're bear tracks. And they get into a big argument about deer tracks versus bear tracks. And while they're arguing, they get hit by the train.
Totally. A lot of times when you're tracking, you're so focused on the tracks, you forget to look up and see the animal is actually right there.
So again, and pardon me for just like harping on this. I'll tell you why I'm doing this. Because I've done a bunch of long meditation courses, and it's been very interesting watching what changes in my mind as I'm going through the course, as I'm spending this time where I'm spending 16 hours a day, watching my breathing, for example, and then, the transition from there back into my normal life. So I'm pushing you because I imagine, again, there's something in there in both ends, going in or out, whichever way you think of it, and then coming back, that I'm hoping that that it's not just me who's got this idea in my head, that there's something there that would be interesting to hear about.
Yeah, so a lot of it was looking back.
Wait, how long ago was this?
This was in 2011, 2012.
Okay, got it. All right.
So a lot of it was my emergence. So, I had this transition. I became happy, healthy, connected, movement-rich lifestyle. And I was realizing, we learn a lot about survival skills, right? Food, water, shelter, the things that keep you alive and happy. And a lot of people are like, oh, fire is the most important survival skill. No. Being able to procure water. No. You got to be able to hunt. No, you got to be able to build a shelter. And I'm like, movement is the most important survival skill. Your ability to move is what is going to allow you to do any of those things. And so I got really curious about movement because as a former IT guy, I had shortened hip flexors. I can't sit in a resting squat. I want to do flips and run like a coyote through the forest. I couldn't do it. So I actually had to really start looking into training. And as I started to go down that road, I realized that biohacking, all this exercise workout, it's I was doing all of that, right? Just by living in relationship with the world around me. I was doing movement. I was lifting. I was carrying. I was forest bathing. I was getting infrared light from the fire. I was grounding I was picking up free radical electrons. I was inhaling all these phyto chemicals from the sky, right? All of these things that people, like meditation. I got into meditation a lot later, but I realized sitting in the forest, not thinking, I'm meditating. When I'm following those tracks, I'm in a deep state of meditation, that all of these things that people separate, if you just go out on a wander through the woods, you're doing the most healthy thing you could do. Natural killer cells increase by 50% after spending 3 days outside.
Wow.
Seeing the color green, lowers your cortisol. I realized after the fact that we are putting a lot of science on things that don't really need it, right? Mm-hmm. Science is just proving that, living in the relationship with the world is the best thing you could do.
You reminded me, I was on a panel discussion about 11 years ago about natural movement. And there was people who were all, functional fitness and instead of go to the gym, go out and climb a tree, et cetera. And finally I said, you can't fake it. What we're talking about, these artificial versions, even going out and climbing trees and just, throwing rocks around, is not the same as when we had to collect rocks to make a house or walk back and forth to have enough water or, all those things. And I said, as a weird example, as a competitive sprinter, if I'm training, if I go out on a Sunday morning and I hit the track and I train as hard as I can, maybe I'm a little sore the next day. But when I'm at a race and I warm up and I run for 8 seconds or 13 seconds, I'm toast for a week. It's a completely different thing because of all the adrenaline, the hormonal stuff that's going on for competing, which is more like hunting or being hunted than training. And no matter how much I try to fake it, did you have a similar experience of just, or I'll say it this way, that doing those things for your actual life and survival, how is that different than what you think of what people were doing as quote biohackers or doing functional fitness, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's really different. It's supplements versus whole foods, right? It's, need equals results, right? I can quit at the gym. I can end my session early. There's going to be food and hot water waiting for you. So you also have this idea of conservation of energy. And ultimately, I have this idea that that is the paradoxical demise of our current species.
That is so interesting. Say more
right?
about it. I'm on it, but say more.
Right? When you're out in the forest and you're living, like, I'm not working out. I'm not doing sets and reps to get stronger. I'm doing sets and reps to meet my basic need, right? If I'm progressively loading acorns into a basket, right? If I'm gathering firewood, carrying water, right? I'm doing all these things to meet my needs. But you know what the number one activity on any survival trip is?
Not a clue.
Napping.
Oh my God.
Like, you hike, So I used to help run a survival trip where it was a 7-day moving survival trip. We would be gathering resources, and then we would find a shady spot in the heat of the day, and we would sleep for an hour, and we'd wake up and we'd gather resources. Then we would take a nap, and then you'd build your shelter, make dinner, and go to bed. Right? Like, you need to conserve resources because they are not as readily available. But now we live in a world where we have that, deep mindset of conservation of energy, right? Like, convenience is the kind of killer / king of like our modern day world, but it's not our fault. It's natural.
Right. No, Daniel Lieberman, who's the guy who arguably really kicked off the whole barefoot running boom by doing research that was in Nature about what happens with your running in shoes or running barefoot. His latest book is called Exercised. And it's one of the first points that he makes is that we have this idea that our primitive ancestors were way more active than we are. And he comments like they spent a lot of time just lying around, napping, hanging out, chatting. There's more fidgeting. There's more activity in a way, but it's not like they're expending a lot more calories than anybody now. And to your point, it's like, yeah, when resources are scarce, you've got to make sure you're using them as best as possible. You're not, wasting your energy where you need more resources than you can accumulate. I love that. So then I'm again dying to hear 9 months. What was the transition back? What was it like coming home? My God.
Yeah, it was challenging. It took me probably like 5 years of coming home, once or twice a year to really become like solid in myself. So I went home after 3 months, right? So I was there from September to November. I came home from Thanksgiving, boom, dropped down into Milwaukee, downtown, going out to the bar with my friend. And it was kind of like stark because I wanted to share all these exciting things about nature, but nobody really cared, right? And they're like, whatever, like Kyle's talking about birds again. And so over time, I found that the things that I was really passionate about were not valued in that space, at least if I presented them. If I would find people who would ask me, they would be super excited. So there was that challenge and that disconnect of like, wow, like this is how disconnected people do not give a shit about nature, right? Like it's just in your way till you get to the thing that you're going to.
Right.
And it took years and years of coming back to really settle into who I am. And to realize the place that I was going was actually full of nature. So when I would go back to Milwaukee, I would find foxes in the middle of the neighborhood. I would find Cooper's hawks hunting between the houses in the suburbs. I would find owls and nests in abandoned buildings. So I was starting to open me up to the idea that nature is everywhere, whether you're aware of it or not. Right? Things are happening. And that helped me deepen my sense of belonging that like wherever I go, like I'm in nature. Like a city is just a weird modified environment.
The last time I was in New York City, I spent about an hour in Washington Square Park among a whole lot of hubbub, a lot of activity. But I spent the whole hour looking up because there was a peregrine falcon just circling overhead for an hour. And I was like the only person who noticed. And it was awesome.
Yeah, and you'll see, the pigeons will tell you where the peregrine falcons are. The crows and the jays will tell you that, bird language is really kind of one of these deep, deep skills that a lot of people aren't even aware of, that concentric ring is happening around you.
There's a thing out here in Colorado, there's a lot of prairie dogs. And for people who don't know prairie dogs, think cuter meerkats is the best way I can say it. And what people don't know, prairie dogs have a language as well. And what's really entertaining about prairie dogs, they know who people are. So they have different things they say depending on whether they recognize you or not. Or sometimes they just recognize a cyclist versus a runner, but oftentimes they know who you are and they respond. And it's very entertaining. I remember riding my bike once by a prairie dog field, and this one baby just, like really, really young, just came up to check me out. I mean, like stood, 6 inches away just to check me out. And then I came back next day and it's like, hey, you again. It was super, super fun. And it's painful that people are having to figure out how to deal with their economic goals of like, I want to build a house where these prairie dogs are, and prairie dogs. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, and that's, a big part of the modern dilemma.
Yeah.
Is, we want to cut down a forest that's full of food to grow corn, right? Yeah. So I've been into acorn harvesting, and acorns are incredibly abundant. There are hundreds of kinds of, or not hundreds, maybe. There's at least 15 different kinds of acorn here in Minnesota, and they're abundant. They're so widespread, and they can basically replace your almond flour, right? Gluten-free, they're sweet, they have all these nutritional benefits, and they're also, like, most of the food people eat is not even native to North America.
Right.
And we cut down huge swaths of forests full of food that is just waiting to be harvested in order to grow food that's not from here, that's not as good for you. So it's kind of this and that's what I really like, the idea of permaculture. That was a big thing taught at the school, tending a landscape, because people have been living on this planet for a long time. And like John Muir, I think it was, he went to California for the first time and was like, look at this pristine environment. It's been completely untouched by humans. And then he found out, like, wow, native peoples have been tending to that environment for like at least 3,000 years.
Yeah. What's the word for that? Crap. I can't find the word for that sense of self-importance when you don't realize that, oh, no, you're the one who's new here. That's a good one. So I want to back up to the movement thing, not surprisingly, because we are on the movement podcast. And so you're taking people out and helping them experience some of what you experience, obviously not to the same extent. But can we talk about just wherever you want to take the whole phenomenon that you're discovering when you're working with people and then moving out in nature?
Yeah, so it's very multifaceted, right? So this idea of natural movement is kind of put on a pedestal that, we all want to move naturally. Well, a lot of us are compromised because of lifestyles that we've lived with chairs and soft beds and all the things. So actually using strength and conditioning perspective is really helpful. Using a modern gym to give you the strength and mobility to actually move naturally, right? So that's one idea. We can start to bridge these worlds. Like, that's what I feel like my gift is. So in my online training world, like, people want to do natural movement, but they can't. So let's do strength training to give you the skills to move naturally so you can do that more.
So what are some of the examples of things that people would do in a gym that would be helpful for them if they're out in nature?
Yeah. Split squats, right? That's like the biggest one. Split squats, sled pulls and pushes, and basically anything, but those are like my go-to, because your knees and your hips are really important, because guess what? The earth is not flat. And in fact, it is quite hilly and is soft and undulating, and there's rocks and there's logs and there's water. There's all these dynamic surfaces, right, that we need to move over, under, through, and around. So being able to move up and down, like an exercise that I give people is simply just get all the way down to the ground and all the way back up, and do that as many different ways as you can. And that's it, because no path is ever the same.
Right. I like that. I want to emphasize on like split squats or sled pulls and pushes, that one of the things that I find that I like about those, because I love both those exercises, is that they're not bilateral. They're using one leg at a time effectively. And there's all these exercises we do where, whether we're doing regular squats or deadlifting or bench pressing, where we're using both sides of our body in a way that we would pretty much never do in the quote real world. And ironically, if you don't do them in a gym, they're better as well. I mean, there's just a lot of benefits for not limiting your range of motion, or limiting the way you have to move. If it's not the range of motion, the path of motion, with things that are bilateral or constrained by some other way.
Yeah. I mean, you're constantly lunging. If you're out foraging for berries, right? And the berries, like you've gathered all the berries that are close to you. Now you have to get the berries that are far from you. You are now starting to lunge, and you're getting into all of these like quote unquote like bad form movements, right? Like if I'm reaching up and over or down and under to like get these things, I'm not like, a robot trying to keep my spine straight and to not put my knee over my toe and not doing these specific things. Yeah, it's a dynamic environment. So I really believe in, like training out of alignment, training in these as deep of a range as you can go into, so that you can be as prepared as possible for what's getting thrown at you.
Well, I like prepared as possible, because again, it's very different when you're doing it for your survival versus when, hey, I just did my half hour at the gym and now I'm going home. And also I think about this like with sprinting training, where you want to do a lot of strengthening work, but as you get into the season of competing, you tend to lose certain muscle mass in certain places because it's not efficient to have that extra mass when you're running. I imagine there's a similar thing when you do the strength training in the gym, but then you get out into nature. There's I imagine there's kind of a pruning or a tweaking or a changing of just how what you did there doesn't quite apply. So some sticks around, some tweaks, some, changes, some goes away. Am I off base on that?
No. Are you familiar with Mick Dodge? Oh, he's like the barefoot sensei. He had a show on Nat Geo.
Oh, sorry. What am I talking about? Yeah, of course.
So he's a good friend of a guy that I work with, Rafe. And, his motto is like, as you start to feel into your feet, your body will kind of adjust to the appropriate weight. Like he was a big, strong guy. He was a power lifter, and he lost all this weight as he started to kind of live in this, nature-based environment.
Yeah.
And, I like a good metaphor is your body is a car and your brain is like the car driver, right? Race car driver. Even though, I mean, obviously they're the same, there's no separation, but for the metaphor's sake, we're going to go with it. So no matter how good you are at driving your car, if you have a flat tire, it doesn't matter, right? That could be a bum knee, a hurt shoulder, a broken toe, whatever it is. It doesn't matter how good you are at moving the vehicle, right? So we want to fix up and upgrade and take care of this thing. But we also want to learn how to use this thing, right? And I find that just giving people permission and that natural movement perspective really helps them learn how this thing works. Oh, wow, like I'm actually way better than I think I am, mostly because I don't do anything outside of the box, right?
Right.
Well, you have this idea too that like a bodybuilder is like driving around a Ferrari in downtown traffic, right? Rush hour traffic. You have this super fast car, looks really good, but you don't really get to do anything with it, right? And then you see a lot of parkour athletes, they're like driving Geo Metros like off-road, right? They're fucking corkscrews and flips. They're wrecking those things. Those guys are constantly injured, right? what I want to design is like a 2017 Subaru Forester, right? I want it to look good, but I want it to be able to navigate through all the environments, right? For me, it's about connection and meaning. And I get the most meaningful experiences when I can explore with my body and be in relationship with the environment, whether that's climbing a tree, foraging for food, or just doing flips on the beach, right? I want that sense of freedom and that sense of connection. And it takes walking in both worlds, right?
Yeah.
It takes gym, it takes grocery store, it takes hikes, it takes barefooting, it takes barefoot shoes, right? I'm trying to, for me, I've been kind of on this mission of bridging the worlds. Like biohacking is like taking all the best things about nature and making technology out of them, right? Stand in front of an infrared light, do a sauna, binaural beats, supplements. And then you have like like I'm living only off the food that I grow and hunt and whatever. And I think there's so much missing in this middle area. And that's why I love like zero shoes, right? Shoes are a tool. And I have shoes that are your classic thick-soled pointy shoes, because when I'm taking big drops and I'm doing precisions to rails at height, I'm not messing around, right? I want that. But I'm not wearing it every day that it's, constricting my foot. I have my zero sandals when I'm just kind of out in the woods, and I have my zero 360s when I'm doing, mid-level parkour. So my goal is to take the best of these modern inventions, these modern technologies, and my experience in being in relationship with the world, and I want to bridge them and make it accessible to as many people as possible, because it's really, really easy.
I love that you said that, because so many people, all they want to do is demonize the quote modern world, and in a way that isn't really helpful, because it's not like you can escape it. I mean, yeah, you can, but that would be a freakish, weird thing. It's not accessible to more people. And to your point, coming back to, the point you made a couple of times of finding all this natural stuff in the middle of a city, in the middle of wherever you are, is something that most people don't think about. And I'm hoping that it's making people who are listening to this or watching this ponder, like, what can I find? What can I pay attention to? I mean, oh God, I just had the craziest flashback. My wife and I we were renting a townhouse that was on open space. So it was nothing but just grassland until the Rocky Mountains. And one day I'm sitting out with a friend, doing a very wonderfully modern thing. We were having a beer. And then we see like a 7-foot long bull snake come out of the grass. And it was heading towards a bush that I knew there was lots of little bunnies in that bush. And suddenly the mama rabbit shows up. And we went, what the hell is going to happen here? The snake is going to kill this rabbit and then get all the bunnies. And the rabbit took down the snake. And then I got on YouTube, thanks to modern technology, and went rabbit. I typed in rabbit versus snake and found a whole bunch of videos of what looked like what I had just seen. And so here was this, and granted, in Colorado, you can't get too far from nature, even in the middle of the city. You've got mountain lions who come way farther into the city than people know, bears who do the same thing. Of course, there's deer everywhere. There's elk sometimes, and moose, and of course, snakes, and, wherever. I mean, it's the opportunity is much greater than when I lived in New York City, for example. But I'm also realizing how little I take advantage of that, or how little I go out to try to explore the stuff that I don't see because it falls in my lap. And it makes me want to do that. And I just love this idea you have of bridging these two worlds. Can you think of anything, any other ways that for people who are find this interesting, that you're helping people recognize that or start to do that? Other than obviously doing the things you have online in your courses, et cetera. And we're going to talk about that, but just to give them a taste of something.
Yeah. I mean, you just gave kind of the gold standard example, right? You can go on YouTube, Nature is Metal, and see all these like crazy, ridiculous things. And those are all happening in your backyard, right? And so your attention is your most valuable resource. And people don't realize that, like, your attention, as somebody who's trying to sell things sometimes, I'm aware that people spend billions of dollars for a second, a millisecond of your attention. And that is how valuable it is. And you can direct your attention to anything, right? Including the natural world. And that's all you have to do. And so a practice we call sit spot is you go outside and you sit and you go to the same spot every day. It could be on your porch, on your balcony, right? The closer, the more convenient it is, the more likely you go there.
Yeah.
And the more that you go there, the more opportunities you have to see really cool, crazy things. And you can set up a camera, you can set up a trail camera to see things that are happening when you're not there. Like there's all these videos of like people's doorbell cameras catching foxes, and coming down the middle of the street, and yeah, come springtime, like birds are killing other birds constantly.
Well, I'm not doing birds killing.
Backyard and watch it.
I'm not doing birds killing other birds, but last night when I was driving home, I'm at this one intersection, I'm at a stoplight, and on every pole and on every wire, jammed in as tight as humanly possible, nothing but birds. There was, I mean, I can't be exaggerating to say there were thousands of them. And I seemed to be the only one who noticed. And they were just hanging out, not doing anything. No one was flying in, no one was flying out. They were all just sitting there. Just, I don't know what they were waiting for, but thousands of them. It was, and literally it occurred to me, I went, oh, spring's coming.
Do you have any sense of what kind of birds or what color they were?
They were tiny little black birds. And I'm literally pulling up a picture now to see if I can find it or if there's enough resolution to like show it to you. No, it's not high res enough. No, I don't. And that's one of those things, I'm actually really bad at that. I don't know things like bird species, or I'm not even good at trees. And that's something that I want to get better at. No, I mean, it's like they look like that.
Okay. Yes. So the cool thing is to start asking yourself these questions, right?
Yeah.
Does this happen, or has this been happening and I'm just noticing it? Or do I think because I'm noticing it, it's not happened before? Right?
Well, I'm working on the assumption that this happens regularly and I just noticed it. I mean, I think I've noticed something akin to this before, but this is literally the first time I saw that many birds in that one spot. That was kind of freaky. I mean, I definitely understand about bird migration, and I know we're on a couple of paths, but that was, and I don't think that those guys are sticking around here. I think they're on the way somewhere. So, but to your point, I forgot about it when I got home, and now I want to go look it up and see who they are, where they're going.
And that's a great example of your attention.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that happens is we teach people about birds, and we teach them about hawks, and they find out about red-tailed hawks. And it's kind of funny. People will be like, what kind of hawk is that? Like, I don't know. What color is its tail? Like, oh, it has a red tail. I'm like, yeah.
Guess what? I had one of those hovering over me on Sunday for about 10 minutes, mostly because there was a big wind and it was just, hanging out about 20 feet over my head. It was so much fun.
Yeah. So again, they're the most common bird. But people learn about this bird and then they see it everywhere. And they're like, Kyle, like, there's all these red-tailed hawks in my neighborhood. They were never there before. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they just showed up. And it's like, no, they've been there the whole time. Your brain is constantly filtering out things that are not relevant information to you. And that's kind of the detriment of nature disconnection.
Yeah.
People don't see nature as relevant, so they literally don't see it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why they're missing out on all the cool things, the snake and the rabbit, the bird drama, right? So much is happening, but people literally can't see it because it does not register in their brain, whether they physically see it or not, right? Like, what's the basketball example?
With the gorilla.
How many passes, and then a mascot runs across the thing. Like,
right.
How did I not see that?
Here's a perfect example of that you'll love. Have you ever heard of muck diving?
Maybe.
So muck diving is scuba diving in places where people think there's nothing going on. So it's in between the reefs. It's just where it's like looks like nothing but sand. So a former neighbor of ours wanted to get into videography and heard about muck diving somehow. And so he set up like a 3-foot square patch of sand in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, and would just go back there multiple times a day, every day, and had a super, super good camera that was taking, microscopic level pictures, not microscopic, but, really, really small pictures of really, really small things, and just sat there with a camera in this like little area. And then he sent his videos to some marine biologist, and the guy says, "You just discovered 27 new species." In the middle of where people think nothing exists. He had this one picture of an octopus. Not picture, video of an octopus. Amazing. And then I said, what was that like seeing that? He goes, "Well, you have to keep in mind, it was the size of my thumbnail." It's like, what? So you're giving me all these great flashes and inspirations of, what to do to go pay attention to things that I haven't been paying attention to.
Yeah. Like I was just in Mexico, and I had like an upset stomach, as one does when you've eaten a lot of tacos. And I kind of, on the side of the road, I just stopped and I kind of laid on this bench, and I looked at the ground, and I saw a train of leafcutter ants carrying leaves. Right. And I would have never seen that. Yeah. Right. So there's levels of life happening all around you that is absolutely ridiculous. And all you have to do is pay attention.
I love it. Well, so if people are inspired by this and they want to find out more about what you're doing so they can learn about how they can be paying attention differently, how they can be moving differently, how they can be living in the world, not about trying to get rid of this one or idolize that one, whichever one they're getting rid of or idolizing, how would they do that? How do they find more about you and what you're doing?
Exactly. So I have kind of two projects going on. I'm just about to launch my retreat schedule. And that's really the best way, is an in-person, in-depth experience with other like-minded individuals that, right? You can only describe things so well. You can only verbally convey information. But when you have these ineffable experiences, like, that's really where you get that deep, deep level of connection that cannot be conveyed in any other way. Yeah. So in June, on June 17th, I'm running what I call the Art of Belonging. And that's a workshop, a weekend workshop where you come out and you get to be immersed in the environment, and through play, which check out Andrew Huberman's podcast on the benefits of play, because as an adult, you need to play, and in nature is like the best place to play. Like when you were talking about your heart beating, well, when you play a sneaking and hiding game in the woods, you've never seen somebody dive into a bush so fast, and you're just like, right? And so that's kind of the big thing that I do. And then the other thing that I do is I do online personal training. And that's to help give you the tools and permission to have a body capable of going out into the wild world. I have a blueberry spot on top of a mountain in Washington that only the Wolverines travel. And that has been my original motivation, to be in shape enough. Like that's my aging goal. I want to be capable enough to get to my blueberry spot in the mountains. Nice. Right. And so whether you want to just be able to pick up your grandkid, or I just trained one of my clients. He just went fishing in Colombia for a peacock bass. And he's like, "Kyle, I got to be able to hike 6 days off trail, and I'm going to be on the river fly fishing all day." Right. I'm training people for adventure. So through my online personal training, I have an app. We do a combination of both natural movement to prepare you for those movement obstacles, and strength training to make sure you're strong and capable to be able to endure that type of adventure. And you can find me on Instagram or trottingsparrow.com.
So wait, give it the URL again, or the IG again, so people hear it again.
Yeah. Instagram is at Trotting Sparrow, all one word. And the website is www.trottingsparrow.com.
And of course, we'll have that in the show notes, but I just wanted to make sure people could hear it if they need to hear it. And trotting sparrow, I love the not an acronym. What's the word I'm looking for? These are like seem like mutually exclusive ideas, an idea of trotting and sparrow, which is why I love that. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I was a wilderness therapy guide, spending over 200 days in the woods, helping facilitate youth through therapeutic experiences. And one of the kids was talking about like rising phoenix. He's like, oh, like, coming to this program was like his rising phoenix. And I'm like, I'm more like a trotting sparrow. Like, I know that I'm destined to fly, but I'm okay with the path that I'm on.
I love it. Kyle, dude, this has been a total pleasure. And again, I just love not only the things that it inspired me to remember, but just the inspiration for the things that I want to do now. And so I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's kind of overwhelming. I'm thinking about, so in the space between our house and we have a hot tub outside, the number of times I walk out and I'm going, I wonder what those tracks are. Because there was something that just walked by here. And now I got to find this stuff out. And I love learning new things. So this was super exciting. So thank you once again for being here. I can't wait to hear what happens next. I can't wait to hear from people who track you down, pun intended, and find out what their experience is like of merging modern and natural worlds. And so I'm going to sign off and just tell people, it's like, so can't wait to hear what you guys think. Share this, comment on this, like it, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell icon on YouTube if you're watching there. And again, go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com to find out more, get previous episodes. If you have any questions or comments for me, if you have anyone who you think should be in this conversation, just drop me an email, move@jointhemovementmovement.com. I'm sure there's something else I'm forgetting, but most importantly, just go out and have fun, live life feet first.